Hi. So I thought I'd talk today a little bit about something you might do if you've got some leftover 10-inch squares. We all have leftovers of some sort, and today I found a pile of 10-inch squares left over from who knows what. Something in my stash. So I thought I'd have a little bit of fun with some 10-inch squares and how we might use a few, particularly if they're leftovers, but they don't have to be. It could be for a project. And I've also cut, for myself, I wanted to alternate some things with a plain colour, so I've got some quite bright colours here, so I thought I'd use a white. So I've cut some white 10-inch squares, but I've also got some that were pre-cuts that are 10-inch squares. So what I thought we'd do is make some half square triangles, something like these, from our 10-inch squares. It's a very good use of the fabric, it doesn't waste anything particularly, and it's kind of fun, quick and easy. So what I'm suggesting we do is lay right sides together, two fabric squares, 10-inch squares in this case. They could be any size, but for the size I'm going to make, this is what I'm doing. So I've already marked with pencil, which you may be able to see. I've marked the two diagonal lines, and I've marked the halfway on the straight as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that again with my pencil so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. And then we're going to stitch either side of the diagonal lines, and then we're going to cut it apart, press things, and then just trim up our little half square triangle units. So I've got my trusty mechanical pencil here, and I'm going to just draw a diagonal line right through point to point, and I'm going to have that line so that I can stitch either side of it. So that will be a cutting line. So any of the lines I'm drawing at the moment are cutting lines, but not till after we've done the sewing. So I've done the two diagonal lines, and now I'm going to line up this on my board so that I can get things sitting nice and straight. And I'm going to do a halfway line down there, and that should intersect that line, those lines where we've gone through on the diagonal, and it does very nicely. And I'm going to turn that around, and I'm going to do the same thing in the other direction. Not absolutely essential to do these lines because they're cutting lines and we could cut them first, but if we forget to cut them first, it'll be easier to cut things up if we've got a line to cut. So there I've drawn my lines, and now I'm going to stitch 1/4 of an inch either side of the two diagonal lines. So you could have a whole lot of these ready. You could be chain piecing them through if you were making a bigger project, but today I'm just working on one. And I'm going to suggest that you go just ever so slightly less than 1/4 of an inch away from the line, just to make sure that we're not making it too tight for ourselves. So not too close, but just like a scant seam, just a little under 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to do those 4 lines of sewing. This is kind of fun to use up some pieces. It doesn't take too long. We do have to trim the half square units, which is a little bit slower, but so that's 2 lines of sewing done already. Now I need to come and do the other diagonal either side. Sewing done. That wasn't too hard. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to cut through the straight lines first rather than the diagonals with my cutter, which is right here. So right on that line that we drew that was the halfway along, I'm going to cut that through and turn it round and cut the other one through And then the diagonal lines that we have, I'm also going to cut on those. So that we've now got all these wonderful half square triangle units. And same on this half here. So this is a fun way to use up maybe just a few squares by adding in a colour yourself, or maybe you've got a whole set of squares that will work together nicely for a project. I don't know what it is that you have. So what we have here now is a whole bunch. We get 8 of these out of the 2 squares. So I'm just going to press these quickly and then start trimming them down. They'll trim to measure 4.5 inches so that they'll be a finished 4-inch square when they're put into some delicious project that you're making. So I think that's great use of the 10-inch squares. It's no waste. This is just going to be a little whisker that we have to trim off very shortly, and I'll just show you how to do that in a minute. I don't need to press all of these. I think you get the hang of pressing pretty well. I press in towards the darker colour if there is one. So I'll just start trimming some of these. So these ones that I've got here are some that I have previously made, and I'm just going to use this rotary cutting board for this. It's not essential, but it's kind of nice to use. So I'm going to place one of my squares on here that needs trimming. So at the moment it'll be slightly more, and possibly only a touch more than 4.5 inches. I've got a small ruler here. This is a 5-inch ruler, so I'm going to line up my edges. So this ruler very conveniently has a diagonal line on it, so I can set my diagonal right over the diagonal that I've sewn, and I can make sure that 4.5 inches sits on the square, and there's just going to be a little tiny bit to trim off all the way around. So I'm just going to start trimming here, just these tiny little bits off 2 sides. So even if it's only just an absolute whisker that you trim off, it makes all the difference to the unit when you actually go to sew it into something else, because it's nice and accurate for you. So now I've turned it round, or I've turned my wonderful rotating board around, and now I'm going to position it so that the edge that we've just cut sits along the 4.5 inch markings on the ruler there, again with that diagonal line going right along that seam line. So again, there's just a little tiny bit to trim off here, and there we have a very nice little half square triangle unit. So I'll just trim one more while you're watching, just so that you can see how that all goes, although I'm sure you probably know by now. So it's just a little whisker off here, and they do vary very slightly. When we're working with textiles, we find that things can just move a little bit, because textiles are not a fixed thing. They have a little mind of their own, I've noticed. So line up at your 4.5 inch marking, make sure that diagonal is sitting along the seam, and there's very little to trim off this one, but even that amount is worth doing. So it's a little bit, perhaps maybe a little tedious to be doing this, but it's kind of nice and satisfying to have these nice trimmed squares. So I've got a whole lot more there that I need to press and cut, but I won't bore you by doing all that right now. I just thought I'd give you this suggestion of things that you could do with some leftover 10-inch squares. So as you can see, I've already been having a lot of fun with a few here. You can use them as a random scrappy look. You could make some little pinwheels, like I've just started sitting here together. So you would get 2 matching pinwheels out of your 2 squares. It makes 8 of these units. So that was just a really little idea. If you've got different size squares, you can do exactly the same thing. Of course, you're going to end up with a different size unit. So I had to go with some 5-inch squares as well, and I've just got some very small half square triangle units here, and these ones measure 2 inches, so they're going to be a 1.5 inch finished square, which is a great size if you're doing some smaller projects and things. So any size square will do the same trick. Draw your diagonals, stitch either side so that you can cut them, and then cut them in half the other way as well. and press open and then trim to the nearest size. I don't know the sizes of different squares. I'm sure you can work that out if you're going to have a play. You may have a whole bunch of squares that are a different size that you think this is a great idea for. So you get 8 out of 2 10-inch squares. What more could you want? Go ahead, use up some of those squares and enjoy just the fun of being able to use even small leftover pieces like that. Thank you.